A psychiatrist becomes obsessed with a mute patient who seems to know everything about his life. Dr. Charles Dalton had been a psychiatrist for over a decade, but nothing could have prepared him for the enigmatic patient who walked into his office that fateful day. The man, who went by the name Elias Gray, was an imposing figure, tall, pale, and completely silent. From the moment Charles laid eyes on him, he felt an eerie sense of recognition, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Elias never spoke a word during their first session. His eyes, however, were another story. They were piercing, almost unnervingly sharp, as though they could see into Charles's very soul. Despite his lack of speech, Elias's presence was magnetic. Charles had dealt with mute patients before, but this was different. Elias's silence wasn't filled with emptiness. It was as though every word unsaid weighed heavily in the air between them. His gaze was sharp, observant, and unsettling, as if he knew more than Charles was ready to admit. Over time, Charles began to notice strange things. Elias would sit in the same spot every session, always staring directly at him. But it wasn't just the silence that unnerved Charles. Elias seemed to know things about his personal life that no one, not even his closest friends, could know. The details were minuscule, yet chillingly accurate. He knew about the fight Charles had with his estranged father last year. He knew about the childhood trauma that Charles had buried deep inside, things he had never even mentioned to anyone. Charles tried to push these unsettling thoughts aside, chalking them up to coincidence, but the feeling that Elias knew something he shouldn't kept gnawing at him. It wasn't long before things took a darker turn. One afternoon, Charles arrived at his office to find a note on his desk. The paper was old, yellowed, as if it had been sitting there for a long time. The handwriting was precise, but unnervingly familiar. The note read, "I know what you did." At first, Charles tried to dismiss it, but the words lingered in his mind, growing darker with every passing moment. He was certain Elias was the one who had written it, but how? Elias had never spoken a word. The patient's silence had always been a source of curiosity for Charles, but now it seemed like something far more sinister. Days passed, and the notes kept coming. Each one was more detailed than the last, revealing secrets about Charles's past that no one knew. It was as if Elias had access to his memories, to his deepest, most private thoughts. One note described an incident from Charles's past where he had failed a patient, a mistake that haunted him to this day. Another described a conversation he'd had years ago with his wife, a conversation he had tried to forget. There was no logical explanation for how Elias could know these things. As the notes became more frequent, Charles began to lose sleep. He started becoming paranoid, jumping at every sound, looking over his shoulder for fear that someone, or something, was watching him. His colleagues at the clinic noticed his increasingly erratic behavior. He was forgetting appointments, canceling sessions, and his once methodical mind seemed clouded with dread. Charles couldn't stop thinking about Elias. The more he tried to dismiss the eerie connection between them, the more it gnawed at him. He had to know how Elias knew so much about his life, so he decided to confront him. But every time he tried to ask Elias directly, the patient would remain silent, his eyes betraying nothing. Then, one night, something strange happened. Charles awoke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't remember how he had gotten there, but he was in his office, sitting across from Elias. The patient was staring at him, his gaze intense, almost hypnotic. The silence was unbearable. Then, without warning, Elias stood up and walked towards him. Charles felt a chill run down his spine as Elias reached out and touched his shoulder. The touch was cold, unnatural, and the moment Elias's fingers made contact, a vision flashed before Charles's eyes. It was a dream, or at least he thought it was. He was standing in a dark, desolate street, the air thick with fog. Shadows seemed to move around him, whispering in voices that made his skin crawl. He could feel eyes watching him from every direction. In the distance, he saw a figure, Elias. But this Elias was different. His eyes were no longer piercing. They were black voids, endless and cold. The figure was reaching out to him, beckoning him closer, urging him to follow. Before Charles could move, the vision vanished. He was back in his office, gasping for air. Elias was still there, silent as ever, but Charles couldn't shake feeling that the patient was somehow inside his mind. The dreams continued. Every night, Charles found himself in different places, forests, abandoned buildings, and once, even his childhood home. In each dream, Elias would appear, his expression more menacing with every encounter. The dreams grew more vivid and terrifying until Charles could no longer tell where the dreams ended and reality began. Charles's colleagues began to notice the toll it was taking on him. His once pristine appearance was now disheveled, his movements jerky and erratic. He had become consumed by the mystery of Elias. When he tried to share his concerns with his colleagues, they dismissed him as being paranoid. But Charles couldn't ignore the truth that was becoming clearer with each passing day. Elias wasn't just a patient. Elias was a catalyst for something far darker. One day, while sitting in his office, Charles decided to dig deeper into Elias's past. What he discovered shook him to his core. Elias had been involved in a series of unsolved disappearances, people who had vanished without a trace over the past several decades. There was no clear connection between the disappearances, except for one chilling detail. They all occurred in towns where Charles had lived at one point or another. The coincidence was too much to ignore. Charles began to connect the dots. Elias wasn't just a mute patient with a disturbing ability to know things about his life. He was something far more dangerous, a conduit for a dark, supernatural force that had been following Charles his entire life. The truth became undeniable. Elias was more than just a patient. He was a manifestation of the darkness that had haunted Charles since childhood. The note, the dream, the vision, they were all part of a twisted game Elias was playing, a game in which Charles was the pawn. Elias was manipulating his mind, pushing him to the edge of sanity. As Charles delved deeper into Elias's past, he uncovered disturbing truths. Elias was not just a victim of the supernatural forces. He was its agent, carrying out a dark ritual that tied Charles's fate to his own. The more Charles learned, the more he realized that Elias wasn't just a patient he was trying to help. Elias was the one controlling him, slowly eroding his sanity. The final confrontation came one night, when Charles found himself standing face to face with Elias in his office, the walls closing in around him. The silent patient was no longer just a man in front of him. He was a force, a dark presence that filled the room, his eyes now glowing with an unnatural light. Charles had no choice but to confront the truth, his past, his fears, his regrets. The past was never truly behind him, and Elias was the key to unlocking the darkness that had been following him. As the truth settled in, Charles knew what he had to do. He had to break free from Elias's grip before it was too late. But as he tried to stand, his legs failed him, and the last thing he saw was Elias's cold, lifeless eyes staring into his soul. Did you enjoy this dark, chilling tale? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-tingling horror stories. Let us know in the comments what you think happened to Charles and Elias, and if you want to hear more eerie, twisted tales like this one.